Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone else out there listening. Doesn't matter how you identify, if you're down in the ocean or up in the sky. This is the Queso You Didn't Know podcast. I am Queso, and joining me as always is.
Tolberto Simpson.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know last week, last month, last year, whenever we release these, I'm going to try to follow the Fred Hampton up with this one. And we heard the story of Fred Hampton. It was a sad, tragic time in America and the world as a whole. So I figured I'd keep the theme going, though, and show you that sometimes a revolution can have positive endings to degrees. I guess you could say 2 degrees, because why degrees, ladies and gentlemen? Today we're covering the Haitian Revolution. It was a complex series of conflicts spanning from 1791 to 1804, and it represented the most radical, successful slave revolt in human history, resulting in the establishment of the world's first free black republic and the second independent nation in the Americas. The revolution was not merely a war of independence, but a profound social and political transformation that overturned the foundational racial and economic hierarchies of the Atlantic world. Its success redefined the concept of liberty and sent enduring shockwaves through imperial and slave-holding powers across the globe, ultimately leading to a crippling long-term repercussion for the newly sovereign nation.
I'm so glad we finally get to dive into an orchestrated story about this, because I think it's something that we dived into across other shows, but it definitely deserves its own story. And like you detailed, really, it's about as unique as unique gets when it comes to the tales told throughout history. It's a time where really a nation of slaves rose and created just the picture perfect example of a successful slave revolt. It's really something that seems only movie-esque, but truly happened.
Right, and it's what everything from the Stano Rebellion to the German Coast Uprising wanted to be. And it hits home because it makes you think, what if these ones on mainland America could have been as successful? What would the world look like today?
I'm sure we're going to definitely dive into a reason or two at least on why it got to be what it was.
Without a doubt. And to do that, I think the best place to tell any story is at the beginning. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Telberto?
I would look like a damn fool if I didn't, and I'm not going to do that.
Hey, look, I'll tell you, Quentin Tarantino may argue with us.
Hell yeah.
All that being said, before the revolution, Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti, was the wealthiest French colony in the Caribbean, often referred to as the Pearl of the Antilles. Its extraordinary prosperity was based entirely on an exceptionally brutal and unstable system of plantation slavery. The colonial economy was engineered strictly for the rapid production of wealth for the planters and their investors in France. The system centered on highly labor-intensive cash crops, primarily sugar, coffee, and cotton. Sugar cultivation in particular necessitated enormous plantations and relentless labor, exhibiting economies of scale that required vast numbers of imported African captives. The immense profitability of Saint-Domingue meant that its entire societal structure was dedicated to maximizing output, leading to severe exploitation and high mortality rates among the enslaved population. The legal framework governing this brutal institution was the Code Noir, created in 1685, a series of royal edicts that prescribed a harsh regimen of penalties for slaves who resisted their captivity. The inherent structural instability of the colony was clearly evident in its demographics. By 1791, the population of 519,000 was severely imbalanced, functioning as a true powder keg. Approximately 87% of the population consisted of black slaves, Noirs, while white colonists made up only 8%, and free people of color, Africanus, or Afrankis, accounted for 5%. The overwhelming ratio of roughly 10 enslaved individuals for every one free person represented an unparalleled level of volatility within the Atlantic plantation complex. The exceptionally harsh living and working conditions led to massive slave mortality, which meant that planters had to continuously import new captives from Africa. Consequently, at the time of the 1791 uprising, The majority of the enslaved population was African-born rather than Creole, maintaining strong cultural and organizational links rooted in African identity. French colonists enforced a rigid three-tiered racial and social hierarchy that was deliberately designed to maintain control and accelerate wealth extraction. At the apex were the white elite, the Grand Blancs, comprising major planters and high-level government officials who monopolized political and economic power. Below them were the poor whites, Petit Blancs, who worked as artisans, shopkeepers, or overseers. Despite their sometimes precarious economic standing, the Petits Blancs fiercely asserted their their social superiority based purely on race, often viewing themselves as superior to the mulatto population, as they were called. The intermediary social castes were the free people of color, known as Afranques, or free coloreds, who numbered approximately 28 to 30,000 by 1789. Descended mostly from unions between slave owners and slaves, this group often achieved high levels of education and prosperity. Critically, the Afranquis became significant stakeholders in the colonial economy, owning perhaps one-third of the plantation property and one-quarter of the total slave population in Saint-Domingue. However, France maintained strict racial codes that ensured this wealthy and educated class remained socially and politically inferior to the poorest whites, prohibiting them from holding public office or practicing certain esteemed professions like medicine. The maintenance of rigid racial constraints, despite the Afranquis' considerable economic power, proved to be a critical strategic error to the colonial regime. By denying the secondary elite class legal and political equality, France effectively ensured that the Afranquis would eventually align against the white ruling class, totally fracturing the colonial minority just as the mass of enslaved people began to mobilize. The success of the 1791 revolt was neither spontaneous nor accidental. It relied heavily on existing sophisticated mechanisms of resistance that had developed organically within the colony. One crucial element was the Maroons, runaway slaves, the Cimarrones, who escaped captivity and established independent settlements, often hidden in remote environments like the high mountains of Haiti. Maroons utilized guerrilla warfare tactics to defend themselves and constituted a constant threat to plantation society, providing a vital blueprint for organized resistance and self-liberation. Colonial commentators such as Médéric Louis-Élie Moreau de Sainte-Marie noted the intense fear among slaveholders regarding the threat posed by Maroons, demonstrating the organizational potential of these groups was recognized, though ultimately underestimated. Equally vital was the role of the Vodou, imported from Africa. Vodou served as a unifying spiritual culture and political framework that transcended the diverse ethnic origins of the African-born slaves. Planters feared Vodou as a source of cultural unrest. However, its complex cultural principles covering aesthetic, political, religious, and domestic life provided the means for the enslaved population to meet, organize, and form coherent political and cultural identities. This structure provided the necessary cohesion that would transform disparate groups of plantation laborers and Maroons into a single focused fighting force.
Well, I guess we serve the purpose and the promise of showing different reasons why. Yeah, it's typical of just the colonization techniques used all over the world. You got those at the tippy top. You got those beneath them who are cut off of certain natural born rights, but they're still somewhere in the middle. Then you got those way down low, and it's usually, you know what I mean, based on a certain color caste system. But I think you show different roles, definitely. And it gives me a good reason to say this because we did go into it on another cast, but just the fact that most slaves were imported to the Caribbeans and not to the Americas. And not only that, just way more. And you explain that your view on that is simply because, I mean, obviously, since they were doing it, it was more money to be made in the Caribbeans off of slavery than in the Americas.
And that's why in certain states like the Carolinas and stuff, you did see higher populations to plantation owners and the white labor force they would have, because when you're growing cotton, it's the most labor intensive crop we had in America. That tobacco is decent too to an extent, but like sugar and coffee, it's a whole nother game. That yeah, they brought in mass amounts of people because those were super labor intensive crops to yield, and they weren't sustenance farming, they were trying to make money.
Right. Yeah, it was just more money to be made out there. And you can't help but think about the fact that, truthfully, not just me, but lots of us had more chances of being Caribbean than we did of being African American, foundational Black American, whatever you want to call it. It just makes you think, not even a coin flip chance. Like, it's like a chance where dice are being rolled and the dice are loaded towards the chance of me being from Haiti or Jamaica as opposed to America.
And the more we get into it, the more you'll see it's hard to tell who would have had it harder, honestly. And that's not to be the one speaking out of turn, because I'm not the Lorax and I don't speak for the trees. All I know is in the research I've done so far, once you really read about how bad they fucked Haiti after the fact, it's really hard to say who had it better.
Definitely, as far as that goes. And while we're talking about what just the revolution and things, and just the fact that, of course, there were exponentially more Haitians than there more people of color than there were whites on the island, and I'm sure that played a part. Also, voodoo and the practice of that. I don't want to speak ahead, but I'm sure you're eventually going to mention Sir Bookman Dada, right?
I'll let you go ahead and take your cap off and let people know who he is now, sir.
Oh, a very intelligent man, hence the name Bookman. That's why they gave it to him. And he was big on embracing his true nature, which he felt was his African nature. And he said most of them were African born on that island at that time. He's famous for saying if they wanted freedom, they had to embrace their African spirit, cast aside their white God, you are free. He's quoted as saying that. He didn't say you could or would be free. He said, embrace your African spirit, cast aside your white God. Essentially, that's all it takes, you know?
Now, how do you feel on that statement, though, given the nature of what especially Haiti was like at the time?
It serves it right because, of course, at that time, especially with the caste system being as strict and as rigid as you're explaining through a summary of your reading, he, I mean, of whites are it's gonna infect some type of inferiority complex on those who are at the bottom of the totem pole of that caste system, as we see in lots of cases that we not just throughout the world, but in the stories that we do. And I'm sure lots of Haitians looked at it that way. And he's somebody that he led Haiti through the gates of the revolution on a spiritual front. He embraced and packaged the vibe and attitude of the Haitians and gave them the mojo. That's basically the gist of Bookman. What I
Right
feel.
on, right on. I like you summed him up perfectly. And I do got to ask because this is one we will be doing a future topic on as well. How familiar were you with the Maroons? I'll tell you the truth, going into it, I wasn't familiar with them until we did the Diego Grillo episode and I did the research for that. And then I come to find out because we all grew up on pirate movies and shit and you hear the word marooned, but you never really think about where it comes from.
Okay, and that's ultimately where it comes from. Like, not even as a color. That's not what it is.
Well, I think it came from the color, but then it got attached to that too because it essentially means going to an uninhabited part of the Caribbean, essentially.
Okay, I got it. I got it. Yeah, because kind of made me think like if there were a group of people named the teals, like the color teal, like blue mixed with green, but it's like hmm, it's a thought. It's a thought.
It's a fascinating concept, and like I said, it's one we will touch on. That is why you see certain island populations down there with African heritage because this island may not have been controlled by colonial settlers and it may not have had slaves brought to it, but escaped freed slaves would go live there to be, free.
Oh, and just between me and you, as somebody who I know has an esoteric eye, as I like to call it. What do you think about the role that voodoo played, and just how that not only how that played a role in that situation, but just how it plays a role overall, how that can be used to bring spiritual forces into the material world.
I think it's a big part of it. And I think when you look at things like chaos magic, you start to see that even if it's just gathering people under a symbol, as fucked up as it sounds, you had the V for Victory in America during World War II, for example. You had the Nazi, the swastika, and you can literally gather people under this symbol and give it this power just through the concept of magic thought. So I think that when you bring people together and you involve rituals such as voodoo, I think it can be a powerful determining factor in how things shake out. And I would not be the least bit surprised to find out that was a major contributing factor to why they were so successful in Haiti.
It played a role for a fact, because especially well at that time, because most of them, like we said, were African born at the very least, so they still had somewhat of a connection to that system. And of course, different cultures and regions and ethnicities had their own versions of it. Because of course, there's the infamous, maybe I should say, Santeria, which is really what that. I mean, at that point. I mean, at this point, that's the basis of that Sublime song title. I don't practice Santeria. I ain't got no crystal ball. Like, so it's overall what I see just one element of what Native people have to connect to something, but still home.
And that's probably the most powerful thing that it can do is that when you're brought across the world, that sometimes that's the only connection you have back to the roots that you left.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And we spoke. The funny thing, I like the podcast that I have now, point that we have out now, where I say that overall, I think that Black people, even though, like, at certain points, they say right now specifically, like, there's a point to where we should have more of a variety of different images. But overall, throughout the years, we really have, especially in comparison to other races, got a decent amount of promotion and stuff for people to see our story and varieties of it, and to know it's not just one thing. It encompasses different things, from the Cosby Show to Martin to The Game to the show I showed you, Girlfriends, A Different World, yada yada, et cetera, et cetera. We get that. But one thing that I would like to see kind of improve, just as far as our ecosystem of doing things, I think voodoo has been demonized for us. A lot of us have been told, just that it's some evil demon worshiping shit to stay away from. That's a lot of our attitude towards it. But I think, truthfully, I would like to see a lot of Black people shed off that attitude and kind of take on to voodoo and stuff if they feel comfortable. Because, I mean, there's evil that can be done with it, obviously, but there's good and bad in all.
Well, exactly. And I'll say, just the occult in general, I feel like everybody's given a bad vibe because you had Christians for the last 200 years telling you, well, occult means demonic, when occult literally just means hidden, like hidden knowledge. And all of it's portrayed as demonic. But when you look at it, what kills me is the hypocrisy of it. What they don't tell you in school, for example, that would make learning a lot cooler is when you learn about the Crucible, when they were judging people as witches and shit, most of those Puritans were actually practicing practical folk magic at the time as we know it. Like they were these super strict adherent Christians to these doctrines, but when they went to their farm and their seeds weren't coming in right, they would literally use practical folk magic to try to fix that situation.
Or even the fact that holidays like Easter is to go along with certain solar events and stuff like that, to go in accordance with that. And that's where its astrology ties are leaned into and stuff like that. And the fact that first century Christians, the original Christians, essentially had a secret handshake, so many other characteristics that would be acquired or tied to a quote unquote cult Like, all this shit is eventually tied into each other, you know?
And the tree of life and the esoteric knowledge that the early Christians had, yes, sir, 100%. And that's the other thing, too, people. When you hear the word of cult itself, cult didn't become a demonized weirdo group gathering until the last 100 years. Initially, a cult was a group of religious believers, and it came from Greece. So when you hear like the cult of Aphrodite, the cult of Hercules, it was literally a small base of religious people that believed that this was the truth. It's no different than saying Catholic or Presbyterian or Jehovah's Witness.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And truthfully, I mean, I'm not giving anything away by saying this, but just the fact that you title the next portion the August Uprising, it's pretty fitting for a point I wanted to bring up, truthfully.
Oh yeah, what is that, sir?
Oh, I'll let you dive into it before I bring that up. I want to see if it ties in possibly.
Let's go ahead and see if it ties on in, sir. The seismic events in metropolitan France beginning in 1789 provided the perfect opportunity for the existing tensions in Saint-Domingue to escalate from localized resistance into colonial wide revolutionary war. The intellectual and political upheaval stemming from the French Revolution profoundly destabilized Saint-Domingue. The 1789 Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, proclaiming that all men were free and equal, resonated across the Atlantic and inspired multiple groups within the colony to seek greater freedom. Free people of color, led by figures like Julien Raymond, actively campaigned for full civil equality with whites, leveraging the new French ideals to demand their political rights. The internal disputes in France and the weakening of colonial governance encouraged planters to agitate for independence from France's restrictive limitations on foreign trade. The metropolitan government's attempts to reform proved disastrously counterproductive. In May 1791, Paris granted French citizenship to landowners, a partial measure intended to appease the wealthy Afranquists. This decision immediately led to armed civil conflict as the white population opposed the inclusion of the free people of color. The consequence was the fragmentation of the colonial ruling minority, placing the two groups of free citizens, whites and Afranquists, into a civil war at the exact moment the enslaved majority launched its massive insurrection. The success of the August 1791 revolt, therefore, was fundamentally enabled by the timing, which allowed the enslaved population to capitalize on internal disarray of their oppressors. Coordinated mass slave insurrection was launched shortly after the pivotal Boys on ceremony led on the night of August 14, 1791, near the northern town of Morne Rouge. This ritual, presided over by voodoo priest Duddy Bookman and priestess Fatiman, was recognized as the definitive starting point of the revolution and a foundational political act of solidarity. The ceremony was far more than a simple religious gathering. It was a covenant of revolt, transforming diverse ethnic groups into a single unified front. During the ritual, a black Creole pig was sacrificed, symbolizing the sacred connection to the spirits and the unequivocal rejection of colonial oppression. By sharing the pig's blood, the participants sealed their pact to political and ideological blueprint to unite the enslaved population, sealed their pact to rebel, utilized voodoo as a revolutionary command structure, providing the necessary political and ideological blueprint to unite the enslaved population and a common fierce cause against the overwhelming colonial power. Days after the covenant, the organized rebellion began on August 22nd, 1791. Slaves, commanded by leaders such as Bookman, Jean-Francois, Regis Biazot, and Toussaint Louverture, began setting fire to plantations, killing white masters, and terrorizing the settlers. This initial insurrection marked the beginning of a 13-year war of liberation. The revolutionary movement that followed was profoundly radical, unlike the American Revolution, which maintained slavery, or the French Revolution, which initially skirted the issue. The Haitian struggle immediately centered on liberty from physical bondage, making it the most fundamental social revolution of the Atlantic Age.
Pretty tight way to wrap that up. What I was going to mention, though, what my point was going to be, or at least my thought, was there's a guy, he's not famous for saying this, really. Something I've heard him say often is, because he's black himself, mind you, and he says that he feels that in summertime, black people basically go back to their nature, so to speak. And that's the case in point to why slave rebellions and just riots and stuff like that happen during the summertime and shit like that, mostly, if not always, like the Watts riots and shit. And he said that around those times we basically go back to our nature because that's the type of climate we're used to being in historically. So he feels that this is a case in point. Maybe.
Can I make an argument to back that up too? Because as you said that, this is where my fucked up mind went. I guess whites come alive in the winter, and that's why they storm the Capitol in January.
Damn, that's a hell of a thought. That's a hell of a thought. Yeah, I was just thinking to myself, like truthfully, my favorite part of winter is when it's over. I can't lie to you.
I
Like,
agree 100%. I love the spring. I love the summer. I hate the fall. I hate the winter.
Like, despite even like how hot and shit it gets, it's like, I mean, if you a motherfucker with a car, or at least can like get in the cars and shit like that, like you dodge that. Like you good really. Just stay in the house and some shit. But like the cold, it's like, I don't know. I remember watching Viva La Bam and shit growing up, and he'd have those episodes where he'd pretty much do weird shit every episode. But sometimes it'd be especially weird, and he was doing like a countdown to the end of the summer, so he's just doing to the end of the winter, so he's just doing a bunch of winter type shit, snowboarding and shit, and he's all like, 2 more weeks of winter means 2 more weeks of fun, and I'm like, dude, I could never, like, you want to be all out in that shit, like that shit is just so thrilling to you, like, just being in the freezing cold, like, no.
I can blend in with my environment. That is some white people shit.
But it is just like, damn.
I
I,
I'd rather be half naked and burning up because you know the good thing. I'll tell you this. Sometimes it's fun to go out and do shit in summer because then you get to come inside and sit in front of the AC, man.
at least it's a nice grace period, a nice cooling off period. I'm not gonna lie to somebody who might argue against that point. It is sort of a good feeling when you come in after being out in the freezing cold and you get to like put your feet by the heater or some shit. But at the same time, the shit that you have to go through to get that, it's not really, I don't know if it's worth it that much.
And I'd argue even when you're hot, at least you feel alive. At least I do, The winter, man, you feel dead when you're out there freezing your ass off. Like, yeah, you come in and you get that transition, but it almost doesn't feel as rewarding because it's like, okay, I'm almost back to being alive. Where in the summer, it's like, you know what? This is just rejuvenating. I already feel alive, but this just feels nice.
Right, exactly. Like you said, the shit you got to go through, it's like,
And then
this
you
is
can go jump in water in the summer, man. It don't matter if it's a lake, if it's a river, if it's a pool. I don't care, man. Just go jump in some nice water.
right. That's something about that. So,
And so, Berto, Mr. Simpson, as a single man, I can't say this necessarily, but you got to admit, it's kind of nice in the summer watching girls go outside versus in the winter. Do you want to see them in a big jacket or a bikini?
right. It's just so many advantages and shit. Like you think about, I don't know, cause yeah, I mean, just living in Cali where it's pretty much, I mean, with global warming and shit, I don't know if it affected California to the point to where it's not pretty much sunshine all the time and shit. I know like during the 80s and 90s and stuff, that's probably when it was at its peak then, as far as people saying no matter what time of the year is in, it was no cloud in the sky. I feel like it's summertime and shit, but I'd rather live somewhere like there than fucking Alaska.
But I will tell you this though. I don't know if you paid much attention over the summer. California, it just dries out real bad and all of it burns in the summertime now.
For real.
Oh, to the point they were like doing mass evacuations at LA, man. Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to find some videos and send it to you. It's wild.
It's damn.
But
It's a hell
Atlanta,
of a thing.
I would say Atlanta, Florida, you still get that same amount of warmth and you don't have to worry about burning up. Except Florida, you do got to worry about hurricanes, but
Oh yeah, nothing is the way it used to be, man. That's a shame. It's gonna. I mean, it has to have a major effect on the reefer in Cali because that's a part of what creates, like, why the weed in California is pretty much the greatest. Not pretty much, it really is like the combination of that soil and that weather, you know?
Well, they can still do a lot of hydroponics, but as you said, you're not going to get the same taste.
Exactly. Like that, nothing, damn, nothing is the same. Like that classic California bud taste, that shit is gonna be extinct one day. Fuck. I hate that.
it 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 can be rough, but as much as things stay the same, they do change, and I think you're going to see that with our boy Louverture, essentially. Now, what's really crazy to think about all this, man, is to put it in perspective. Haiti's the same size as Maryland.
Okay, like, damn, that's a thought of a comparison. Sometimes you can really only get the gist of things when you look at it in comparison, you know?
Right, right. Especially when it's something you know a little better. You hear Haiti and you think, well, how big is this place? It's about the size of Maryland. I think it's like 5 or 10% bigger than Maryland. So roughly the size of Maryland with a little smidgen of Virginia thrown in. Let's say Maryland plus DC.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, you hear a lot of motherfuckers when they hear Haiti, their first thought is going to be something to the extent of something like, that's a whole country. But that whole country, it's fucking a state, really. I mean, in size. So what we're used to looking at.
Exactly. Well, the years following the initial uprising were characterized by a chaotic, multi-sided civil war involving French, Spanish, and British forces. Think of this kind of almost like the Seven Years' War Part 2. The reason they were so dead set on the Caribbean is because, yeah, the British had a lot of sugar fields there and shit too. But really what it comes down to is Spain, France, and England were playing a colonial superpower game, and none of them were going to be outdone by the other. So this fight provided a crucible for the emergence of sophisticated revolutionary military leadership. The internal conflict quickly became a regional geopolitical contest. In 1793, when France declared war on Great Britain, both Spain, which controlled the eastern part of Hispaniola, Santo Domingo, and Britain used the instability to their advantage. These imperial rivals invaded the colony and actively supplied black rebels with food, arms, ammunition, and military advisors to destabilize French control. During this period, Toussaint Louverture, a former slave who possessed self-taught medical knowledge and exceptional military acumen, rose rapidly through the ranks. Initially allied with Spain, Louverture demonstrated extraordinary pragmatism, maneuvering among rival black and mulatto commanders, as well as a series of French political figures. A pivotal moment occurred in 1794. To prevent military disaster and secure the colony for the French Republic against the invading Spanish and British forces, the French commissioners Sonthonax and Etienne Polverel formally abolished slavery in the colony, a decision ratified by the National Convention in Paris, then strategically shifted his alliance, joining the French side. This move successfully leveraged French political necessity, the need for a general in the French forces. Leveraged French political necessity, the need for a powerful local fighting force to solidify abolition and legitimize his growing authority as a general in the French forces. By 1798, Toussaint's powers and forces, fighting under the French banner, had pushed the British out of the colony and consolidated his power. Following the expulsion of external European powers, a crucial internal conflict erupted. The War of the South, Guerre du Sud, fought from June 1799 to July 1800. This war determined who would hold de facto control over the French colony. The conflict pitted Toussaint Louverture, representing the black leadership, against André Rigaud, the leading mulatto military leader who controlled the South. The underlying tension stemmed from the deep-seated rivalry between the Nouveaux Libres, the black former slaves under Toussaint, and the Anciens Libres, the often wealthy mixed-race Africans under Rigaud. This division was intentionally exacerbated by French representatives, specifically Comte de Houdeville, who criticized Toussaint and encouraged Rigaud to assume independent command of the southern department, attempting to defeat the revolution through self-destruction by weaponizing existing class and racial friction. The War of the South quickly demonstrated Toussaint's international savvy. Recognizing Toussaint as the stronger partner in seeking stable trade, the U.S. government provided critical naval support to the pro-Toussaint forces, blockading Rigaud's ports, transporting Toussaint's troops, and bombarding mulatto positions. Despite the U.S. domestic commitment to slavery, strategic interests such as weakening France during the Quasi-War and securing trade, temporarily superseded domestic racial fears. Toussaint's forces, which outnumbered Rigaud's by up to 3 to 1, roughly 45 to 50,000 versus 15,000 troops, achieved victory by July 1800, forcing Rigaud and his officers into exile. Following the victory, Toussaint's general, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, carried out brutal reprisals and massacres against Rigaud's supporters. By August 1800, Toussaint was the undisputed ruler of Saint-Domingue, completing the elimination of his main political rival. With internal rivals defeated and European powers temporarily expelled, Toussaint proceeded to establish total control. He invaded the Spanish colony of Santo Domingo, unifying the entire island of Hispaniola, and proclaimed himself governor-general for life. In May 1801, Louverture's subsequent governance faced a fundamental challenge, reconciling the ideological goal of freedom with the economic reality of surviving as an independent military power. The colonial economy was in ruins, with exports virtually reduced to nil, recognized the urgent need to fund his army to prepare for the inevitable French return. To achieve this, he instituted a mandatory labor system that tied the newly freed population, the nouveaux libres, back to plantations under strict military supervision. While laborers were legally free, no longer whipped, and received a share of the profits, the compulsory nature of the work, rooted in Toussaint's belief that compulsion was necessary to prevent idleness, deeply alienated many former slaves who equated the system with the slavery they had just fought to abolish. The pragmatic decision to prioritize state economic stability and military strength over the peasant demand for immediate land redistribution created intense political friction, even though it successfully revived export production to fund essential military equipment.
He was definitely a hell of a chess player, no pun intended, but geopolitical chessboard is right. And Toussaint, just a real strategist overall. I'm sure you agree.
And you gotta admire, we've talked 3D chess before. This motherfucker was playing 4D chess. Like, you literally are working 4 of the major superpowers in the world like puppets.
It kind of reminds you of, I hear this little Shakespearean story about the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air once. Jeffrey mentioned it. He brought it up because he said it was his favorite Shakespearean story because it's about the superiority that servants have over the people they serve. And I can kind of see it that way. It's kind of the whole somebody you look at them as inferior, so you already don't see them coming.
Exactly, 100%. And I will say, as someone who used to do commercial cleaning for a living, it used to kill me. Or somebody that used to work in kitchens that did delivery. One, it killed me when people tried to act like an asshole to you as a janitor because it's like, dog, you realize I know everything about your life. I could ruin you. I know about the affair you're having with your secretary. And 2, delivering food, man, it's like, you realize we have your address, dude. Why are you acting like an asshole to our drivers? I'll let the motherfucker come back when he gets off.
Yeah, it makes you think, because you don't really think about it that way. But somebody that's preparing your food quite legitly, quite literally, however you want to say it, has the wherewithal to kill you.
Exactly. I was going to say, I know you can relate to that just as well because it's like, dude, if I was another person, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how high up you've made it in this world. You came here and I could take your life today if I wanted to.
That's a hell of a thought. And just the fact that he did all of this and it went through, it'd be one thing because it'd be truthfully one thing. It'd be still a level of impression if he just was trying to pull all this together and it just seemed like a great plan that didn't go through. It'd still just be seen as an example of resilience and stuff like that. But it actually came through.
And it shows, as you said on like the Robert Smalls episode, that I forget exactly the wording you used, but you said, right, to call them enslaved versus slaves, something along that degree, right? That one kind of shows that you're a person that was brought here against your will, but you're just as capable as anyone else. And the other shows you're kind of not on that level. And I think it's fair to say that with these guys, that it shows time and time again that the second you level the playing field and let a motherfucker get to work on your level, he will take you down every time.
I like that. I mean, obviously it's something that had to be done, but it seemed like Toussaint, you mentioned during the labor paradox passage how he he goes out his way to make sure that the vital function of economic independence is a theme along with the war to especially just as much as the whole spiritual background of it that I feel Dudley Bookman was definitely, like I said, the main progenitor of. Toussaint, of course. Those are the two names. If you don't know shit else about the Haitian Revolution, if you know a bit of the basic elementary knowledge, you know those two names. Toussaint Louverture and Dudley Bookman. And Dudley, of course, he's really known as the spiritual background of the revolution. But Toussaint, he was the more organized, orchestrated dude who handled the sophisticated type of business, you know?
I feel every true revolution needs the spiritual side, the unifying side, and the economic or military side to make it effective.
Oh yeah, you know what I mean? Like that's the case with not just revolutions, but any organism of any being, you know, you need the heart and the mind.
And you'll start to see, like we've spoken on before, that this gives me vibes of that if you live long enough to kill the monster, then you become the monster. And I feel like sadly Toussaint gets a little bit of that thrown at him in this. But as you said, he needed the economic thing because it's one thing to seize power, it's another thing to keep it. And the thing that I cannot stress enough with this time period either is every single day these people wake up, they're waiting. It's not a paranoia. It's a when are the French going to come back and try to put their boot on our throat?
Hmm. Made sure that he let the people know, hey, we're going to have to make some money somehow. At the end of the day, it makes sense. And in that case, I don't know if it's, you know what I mean, necessarily becoming the monster, but it's knowing that in that case, it's knowing that a monster is out there and we're going to have to do something about it, you know, come up with some sort of defense.
Exactly. As I said, doing the research, you see, are you kind of in the same position in a way that you were at the beginning of this? In a sense, but at the same time, you have every right in the world to leave that field, and no one's going to stop you, and no one's going to hurt you while you're working it. And I think
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that, like, I get when I did the research. There were a lot of people that were like, well, met the new boss, same as the old. But at the same time, it's like, but not really, man, because the beautiful thing about this is you can literally go anywhere in the world now.
Oh yeah, talk about shit that we talked about. Well, I don't know if we talked about this often, but it's just the whole. Well, you've heard not even the movie, but I think it's just saying at this point, around the world in 80 days or some shit. I mean, if you got your own plane, especially, you can fucking. I think you can touch every. I mean, you can touch every continent definitely in so little time.
There's a motherfucker that did it. I'll have to send you the article. Did it without stepping foot on one single plane. And he's been to basically everywhere you could think of in the world.
So you can do whatever whenever. He he really he really stepped up for his people, you know.
He did. He did. And you'll really start seeing that as we progress because you'll see that the French do come back. And sadly, Toussaint does not get to stay in the world of being the monster half as long as you would think he did.
Well, let's see about that.
Now, as we were saying, the French were going to come back one day, and there was this little Corsican man who was not quite Italian, not quite French, and had a chip on his shoulder from the very beginning. A little artilleryman that served in the Revolutionary War over there in France that came to take over, and you might be a little familiar with him, Mr. Napoleon Bonaparte. The fragile stability established under Toussaint was shattered by this man and his catastrophic attempt to reestablish the French colonial empire in the Americas and reinstate chattel slavery. In late 1801, Napoleon, then first consul of France, dispatched the Saint-Domingue expedition under his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc. Sorry, I'm going to butcher these French names, by the way, people. I am not French by any means. This massive military force, comprising up to 40,000 soldiers and sailors, was the largest European expedition ever sent to the Americas, with the explicit goal of curtailing Toussaint's independent policies and restoring colonial rule and slavery. The French forces initially established and achieved success, forcing Toussaint Louverture to surrender and deporting him to a French prison, where he died April 1803. However, the French attempt to restore slavery, a policy Napoleon had recently implemented in other French colonies, ignited a fierce, unified wave of rebellion. Toussaint's martyrdom was galvanized within the population, who now understood that the fight was not for French protection or conditional freedom, but for absolute and permanent emancipation. Leadership of the indigenous army passed to Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who proved to be a brutal but effective commander, ensuring that the rebellion would not cease until total victory. While Dessalines' military leadership and the ferocity of the indigenous army was essential, the decisive factor in the French defeat was environmental. The European troops lacked immunity to endemic diseases of the Caribbean, most notably yellow fever. The epidemic struck the expeditionary force with devastating severity, rapidly claiming the lives of non-immune soldiers. General Leclerc himself succumbed to yellow fever on November 1st, 1802. Between 35,000 French soldiers and sailors perished from the disease, a loss that effectively neutralized the entire initial invasion strength and rendered subsequent reinforcements meaningless. The revolutionary forces were able to strategically exploit this environment and this advantage they were given. Toussaint, drawing on traditional and self-taught medical knowledge, employed military strategies that exacerbated the spread of the disease among the French ranks. Napoleon later conceded that his attempt to subdue Haiti by force was his greatest mistake. The disastrous defeat forced the evacuation of the French forces in December 1803, marking the definitive end of Napoleon's dreams of a French empire in the West. This failure directly prompted Napoleon to sell France's vast North American holdings to the U.S., the Louisiana Purchase, in April 1803. Ironically facilitating the expansion of slavery into new U.S. territories while ensuring liberation in the Caribbean. With the French defeated at the Battle of Vertères and subsequently evacuated, Dessalines proclaimed independence of the territory, renaming it Haiti, after the indigenous Taino name for the island's high mountains. On January 1st, 1804, in Gonaives, the declaration confirmed the foundation of the world's first black republic, and a state ruled entirely by former captives, prioritizing emancipation and racial equality. To ensure the revolution's irreversible nature and to exact revenge for the attempted re-enslavement, Dessalines ordered the systematic massacre of the remaining French white population across Haiti between February and April 1804. Driven by the militant rallying cry, Coupez tête brûlez, or cut their heads, burn their houses, as many as 4,000 were killed. This brutal action had a clear political purpose. The complete elimination of the former colonial planter class ensured the social and political power then rested with the blacks and those of mixed descent, thereby permanently altering the status quo. Dessalines, prioritizing military security over liberal republicanism, quickly established an autocratic regime. He was crowned Emperor Jacques I in October 1804, consolidating power and focusing on maintaining a large military apparatus to deter foreign reinvasion. The 1805 Constitution further emphasized this radical new identity by proclaiming all Haitians, regardless of mixed heritage, as black, deliberately weaving Pan-African threads into the new political culture.
Truthfully, I just have to ask, isn't it sort of ironic? I know we just spoke about just the converse thoughts, how one thing can mean this on one side, so it possibly means this on the next. Like you said, how you thought, just like how black people possibly come alive in the summertime because that's their original climate, you think white people do it like they did in January 2021. You think it's kind of ironic that, like, of course, through certain sicknesses and diseases, that's a big part of the reason why the Native American population was wiped out, thanks to certain white populations. You think it's sort of ironic, I don't know, sort of a cosmic karma type of situation, even maybe, that now they're dying, lots of whites, due to yellow fever.
It's a beautiful irony in a way, isn't it? It's kind of nice to see the climate work for the native population for once. I'll say that. And it is. It's very ironic that when you think about it on a global scale, I'm sure, and I'll be honest, I didn't know it until I did the research. I bet there's a lot of people listening right now that didn't know the Louisiana Purchase was only accessible because of the Haitian Revolution.
That's a pretty decent chunk of America, all thanks to that. It definitely makes you think what would America be like without the influence of Louisiana.
Or as we'll see when we cover the Stano Rebellion later down the road, Spain as well, because Florida wasn't a territory or state in the Americas until about 1820. And so they really tried to undermine the South in a way that from like the late 1600s on to the time we bought them, they were basically like, hey, any enslaved people that come here, you're free. You're going to be part of the Spanish population and you're going to help us fuck over America. So it's kind of weird to think about how certain political things like that, like, were done just to like poke America with a stick in a way, or poke France with a stick, or Spain. But ultimately, it's like you guys are playing with lives like they're chess pieces, quite literally.
That's the game, though. That's the way it goes, according to them. And it's a hell of a thought to think. I mean, because of course, one of the themes of this show, I think we've established, is that human traits shown throughout time, show that people, no matter how historical they are, they're still human. You know what I mean? Things like that. And with this, it's like, it shows how the whole theme of you getting a job because you're related to the person, or something like that. Like his brother-in-law, he's operating under him, Mr. Leclerc and shit. It's like, you think is possibly the thing where like maybe he was the brother-in-law he didn't even like, but he was like, man, I got to deal with this motherfucker.
Hey man, come on, Napoleon, give my husband a job. He works hard.
You know what I mean? Shit.
Napoleon, I bought you more tropical fish that you will have to take care of until they die.
Right, right, right.
Hey, to be fun, how about you go to the West Indies? Whatever you say, brother. He's like, man, it's fucked up that my whole force died, but at least he died too, man. And
Right,
I'll tell you a fun fact, that's how Russia got as fucked as it was. When Tsar Nicholas II took over and World War I broke out, the reason they had such massive casualties, he literally was just like, I am going to put my uncle in charge of the army. And his uncle was like this big, kind of abusive, mean guy that everyone thought would be good in the role. I want you to picture this now. Tough, burly Russian guy at the turn of the century, locked in his tent, literally sobbing his eyes out because he didn't know how to handle the pressure.
that's something.
That's why you don't hire family.
Yeah, but I'd be remiss if we didn't mention Mr. Saint, him, you know what I mean, an RIP on us, and just the effect that it had. Because you say that all revolutions need that people who represent the heart and represent the mind in human form, so to speak. And some would argue that they also need martyrs of a certain kind or degree, and he definitely provided that, as you said.
And bringing up Tucson, I didn't want to get too in the weeds in it, but I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't, because this is a story where you need to understand the impact of people being treated like chess pieces. What happened essentially is Toussaint was lured to a meeting by Leclerc and arrested in 1802, promised safe passage from Napoleon, but Napoleon feared his power and autonomy. So he was sent to Fort de Joux in the French Alps, where he died from neglect, cold, and starvation. And so you just let that resonate, people. This is not a new thing that people have done. This isn't something exclusive to the Americas and the Native Americans. This isn't something exclusive to politicians and the people they serve. This has been going on throughout all of human history, that I'm going to lure you away, agree to treat you like a human, and then let you die. I wouldn't even say die like a dog, because most people that don't even like their dogs would treat their dog better than that.
Yeah.
Now, you want the ultimate fuck you that the environment gave white people that I think you'll really appreciate? I learned this when I was reading a book on Admiral Nelson. He's a big British naval hero. You've heard of malaria, I'm sure. Malaria is a disease that millions of British, Spanish, and French sailors caught while playing around in the tropics and the Caribbean over here in South America and the Caribbean. And it's a disease that never actually really goes away. So for the rest of their lives, they were plagued with the symptoms of malaria, maybe not as strong as they were when they first contracted it, but plagued with it until the day they died.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, there's always certain thoughts to bring up. I mean, not that you would even want shit to break out on innocent people or anything, because like I think people get at this point. This isn't a hate white people show, but certain things just have to be noticed and to some degree spoke on, you know.
It's sort of like, and I'm sorry, white people, it's sort of like how syphilis came to the Americas and that was only a European disease. Mr. Talberto, do you know how one initially contracts syphilis before it exists in a human population?
How's that?
Having sexual relations with their livestock.
Mm,
So some gross European man fucked a sheep and brought it here to America.
that's
And it's not a hate white people show, but as you said, you've got to acknowledge certain things that they don't teach you in school, man. That's another big thing that this podcast really is about. We're showing you the stories they didn't show you in school.
I mean, the way that chickenpox got its name, because I mean, we spoke about the Moors, of course, on the whole Robert Smalls breakdown. Part of what they did to improve Europe was teaching them how to, how to take care of livestock. Because, of course, the Moors, them being black of African descent, they were used to dealing with animals, used to cultivating farms and just dealing with animals and stuff like that. So,
Talberto said we had to teach him to stop fucking them.
and I mean, teaching them to stop letting them run through the house and shit. You can't let your chicken and your cow just be amongst each other and shit like that. And that's how chickenpox came about, really, just them letting them and other animals just run about.
Well, and that's the interesting thing that and smallpox and a few other diseases came about because of that. But then the irony is the Europeans built up an immunity to it and bring it to the Americas with them, where the Native Americans were living in harmony with the animals and definitely not letting them run through their homes and shit. And you see them die in mass droves because of this. It's so weird to think. As you said, that butterfly effect of one little thing in history, if it was altered, how different would the landscape be?
Oh yeah, we can go for days on end, and really one of these days we're gonna have to do a whole podcast, like it. The whole, I think a nice idea it'd be like a butterfly effect countdown, like the top 10 butterfly effects in history. You know?
Ooh, we could stretch that into 5 parts, man. The butterfly effects and what ifs. Like literally
Oh,
to frame it in a way to go back to our conversation about how you never really see Native Americans at Applebee's. You probably would if European farmers weren't letting their cows and chickens sleep in their home.
yeah, you know what I mean? It's like, what if, like, you just think, because that came from, I'm not going to keep bringing the guy up, but because I brought him up in a few, but basically a joke from a certain stand up. And he's like, everybody talking about race and shit. Who has it worse? Black people, white people. Chill the fuck out. Nobody has it worse than the American Indian. You've never seen an Indian family just chilling at Applebee's. Like, it's like made me think, like, God damn, I never have. I never have.
And it's that whole butterfly effect thing, man. And speaking on butterfly effects, you really start to see it in the case of Haiti that just because you get your independence doesn't mean it's the end of the yellow brick road and everything's perfect. You start really seeing a butterfly effect that took place in 1804 and is still actively sending waves and ripples through Haiti to this day. Because the triumph of the revolution, while epochal for global abolition and black sovereignty, inaugurated a century-long struggle against international hostility and neo-colonial economic subjugation. The newly established nation faced immediate economic devastation due to the cut-off heads, burn houses military strategy, which left thousands of acres of valuable agricultural land in ashes. And the new military elite attempted to maintain the plantation economy to generate essential export revenue, coffee and sugar. Dessalines continued the controversial military supervised labor system, tying freedmen and women to plantations, a policy intended to fund the massive fortifications like Citadel La Ferrière required to defend against the persistent fear of French reinvasion. Because this is still something for the next century that's well and alive there is one day they're going to come back. However, this attempt to restore the plantation system, combined with Dessalines' plan to nationalize and redistribute land, created immense friction. The policy angered the anciens libres, the mulatto landholders, and disappointed the nouveaux libres, the majority who desired individual plots, creating a chronic structural conflict over land and labor. These tensions, coupled with autocratic rule, led Dessalines' assassination in 1806, ushering in a period of intense internal instability. The successful founding of a sovereign state ruled by former slaves was an unprecedented event that terrified slaveholding nations throughout the Atlantic world. The global fear resulted in severe economic and diplomatic isolation for Haiti. The U.S., whose political leaders were often slaveholders, such as Thomas Jefferson, reacted with profound ambivalence, fearing the potential for slave revolt to spread to North America. Although the U.S. provided temporary support to Toussaint against Rigaud during the Quasi-War, the pragmatic strategic alignment did not translate into official recognition. Driven by domestic concerns and xenophobia, the U.S. refused official diplomatic recognition of Haiti until 1862, 58 years after independence. The international stance crippled Haiti's ability to secure trade and alliances. While nations like Britain eventually formalized trade agreements, Haiti struggled for decades to gain legitimacy, only slowly securing formal diplomatic recognition between 1825 and 1862. The successful black sovereignty was consistently overshadowed by racial fears in global policy calculations. Nevertheless, Haiti's revolutionary example contributed significantly to global momentum against slavery, frightening both France and Britain into eventually abolishing the seizure of Africans as slaves and accelerating the end of the transatlantic slave trade. The most devastating consequence of Haiti's geopolitical isolation was the French indemnity debt, a forced financial extraction that institutionalized neo-colonial control over the nation's economy for over a century. In 1825, 21 years after independence, France, under the threat of French warships, imposed an indemnity of 150 million gold francs on Haiti in exchange for diplomatic recognition. The demand was framed as compensation for the lost property of former French colonists. This amount was calculated unilaterally by France and far exceeded the actual losses incurred. France forced the former slaves, the winners of the revolution, to compensate their former masters, the losers, creating a debt that was legally and diplomatically aberrant. And to put this in ways people can understand, 150 million bucks doesn't sound like a lot now. That was quite literally billions on billions of dollars, as you'll see coming up. The astronomical sum of 150 million francs immediately necessitated that Haiti take massive loans from French banks, initiating a mechanism known as the double debt. Haiti was obligated to pay the indemnity to the French state while simultaneously paying crippling interest on the loans required to finance those payments to French financiers. A considerable portion of the indemnity thus flowed directly to the same financial bourgeoisie in Paris, Nantes, and Bordeaux, who had previously profited from the trafficking of enslaved Africans to Saint-Domingue. The indemnity became a sustained financial drain, calculated to make the nation economically unviable. By the late 19th century, up to 80% of Haiti's national wealth was dedicated to servicing this foreign debt. Although the debt was eventually reduced and the final portion of the original loan was paid by 1883, Haiti had to continue paying off subsequent loans taken to service the original indemnity. Through this continuous borrowing, the final payment to foreign debtors, which included American investors after the U.S. government funded the acquisition of Haiti's treasury in 1911, was not made until 1947. This payment marked the end of 143 years of effective financial subjugation. The estimated financial injury inflicted by those forced payments is immense. While the total direct payments amounted to 112 million francs, approximately $560 million adjusted for a 2022 inflation. Had those funds been invested in the Haitian economy instead, the cumulative value is estimated to be approximately $115 billion today. That's the difference between being a mid-level, small economy for a country and a poor country. And that's why Haiti has a lot of the problems it does today, because this essentially put a boot on their throat and didn't allow them to develop economically. And when they were allowed to start selling their goods, they were still using 19th century methods because they couldn't modernize their workforce because they had no money to. The enduring legacy was highlighted when Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide demanded in 2003 that France repay 21 to 22 billion dollars in reparation for the extorted debt. This demand, however, was immediately followed by intense pressure from the French and US governments and Aristide's subsequent overthrow in a military coup, demonstrating the continued geopolitical sensitivity and impact of the indemnity issue.
Yeah, man. It's funny how certain things, it makes you wonder until you find out that it makes all the sense in the world and it was staring you in the face. Like, just the biggest elephant in the room. Because certain people wonder certain things like, man, how does a place like Haiti have it so bad for so long? They've never had a place to where they've just had just a good diplomatic footing in the world as a nation, but you think about it, it's like, yeah, you're the quintessential example of not just a slave revolt, but a revolution, period, like the slaves whipped their masters' asses in war and in battle, just strategic thinking, and you've done that, but now it's like, to say something that's very Dave Chappelle-esque of me, it's like, you've done all that. Now, you just a nation full of niggas that everybody's scared of, like you're a nation full of slave revolting niggas in their eyes. It's like you said, people in North America, obviously they had some paranoia about that. They ain't going to do no business with you. And same with other places. That obviously played a major, major role to start with. Like, not even talking about the debt, not even getting into that right now, just that image alone. White, of course, you can't help but say white people, yada, yada. In certain cases, like white people, in certain cases, they were going out their way to create silly stereotypes that didn't even exist. So at the same time, when you have something like this, that it's a stereotype that really to a certain degree does exist, because there are some slave revolts in blacks, and that's something they didn't want. No white nation at that time.
And as you said, like they were so afraid in America that they really did. That's when they started banning teaching slaves to read and write. That's when they really started like restricting the travel that slaves were allowed to do. That's when they really started restricting how many slaves could be on a plantation per how many white people, like you said. And then it's hard to find legitimacy in the world because who's the world run by? I mean, even now, who's the world run by? But especially back then, it wasn't run by people that look like you and me.
Right, right. It definitely shows how certain things can stunt not just a nation, but people individually, their growth for such a while. Once certain things hold you back, now you got to recuperate from this and other things that you were possibly doing at that time. Like you went on to say they pay the debt eventually, but then they have to pay back people who they were borrowing from at that time. You know how that shit goes. So it's like so much more money. It's like, and the way you put it, like foreign debt. I never heard those two words be put together to form a phrase, and like for a debt to legit be foreign. Like, man.
And not just that, you think so in 1947 they're all paid up. You literally are trying to play catch up for the last 200 plus years. Well, 100 plus years, my bad. 140 plus years at that point. And essentially, like I said, that's the other fucked up thing is that 80% of their money was going towards this debt. So they literally, while they're building trains and railroads and cars and planes and everything else in all these other countries, Haiti doesn't even have a way to modernize its farming. That they were literally still using equipment and techniques from the 19th century because they had no way to update it. So even once your debt is paid off, you have no way to modernize your infrastructure and then using coffee and sugar as a commodity anymore too. Think about it. Think about how common coffee is. You walk into Walmart, there's a whole aisle full of literally hundreds of pounds of coffee. It's not
Mhm.
the economic superpower it used to be, and you can get sugar for like 10 cents a pound. So there's no way for you to sell these things at the prices you were selling them at before to make money back. They're down a creek without a paddle, so to speak.
And just while we're on that subject, what do you think about the fact that, I mean, if you really think about it, you mentioned the whole, in comparison to those days and the days we're living in, the world is more or less a European ran world. And what do you make of the thought that, or really the fact that, if you think about the last 400 years being a more European centralized world, compare that to other reigns, in comparison to that, 400 years don't even register compared to how long other reigns were. Just makes you think just how our view and vision on things is kind of limited, it kind of yeah, basically, like I said, it's limited, and it can kind of give us a different perception of something.
I think you're 100% dead on. Like the Achaemenid Empire, the one that Darius the Great was part of, literally it was around 220 years. You think about America, we're just now coming on to 250 years. So yeah, you can look at even a tiny little speck of when the world was controlled by just these people for just 220 years and see just how different it is for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. For like you said, playing catch up for that, like robbing Peter to pay Paul for a century plus, like yeah, that definitely explains a lot about Haiti. I can't lie, and it's fucking tragic to say the least, because Haiti kinda. This sounds like I'm making a joke, and I'm not, but it's kind of seeming like the family member that's without, it's like, as far as, if the world's nations were a family, Haiti would be like the family member that ain't got it and often begs and borrows from others.
And it's one of those where it feels even worse because it's like some motherfuckers are in that hole because they put themselves there. Like literally, this is like the family member that every other day something terrible is happening to them and they can't even stop it, so they have to ask for a few dollars here and there.
Yeah, man, it's terrible. Like no tango dinero, evidently. And like you said, once upon a time, I remember, just the climate doesn't make it better, because these motherfuckers, anytime it rains a little too hard, they're submerged underwater.
Man, and you really want to drive a point home here. You ready for this? So, Jean Bernard Aristide survived multiple attacks and was ousted in a 2004 coup after demanding France pay reparations, as we said, an event later admitted by a French ambassador to have been orchestrated with the U.S. to stop his demands for colonial debt repayment. And in 2017, he was shot at in Haiti, and he wasn't really allowed to return back home until 2021 after contracting COVID-19. So,
Mm.
quite literally, you want to talk about the European powers in charge. They were like, hey, America, you're really good at overthrowing countries that piss you off. Will you help us take this guy out so we don't have to pay them $22 billion?
Man, the tidbit facts, not gonna lie.
And then
The
you think
country,
about their GDP is 3 trillion. So what is 22 billion to them?
right, right. You know what I mean? That's that's a hell of a thought, a hell of a point. And with all that said, I think
0.73%. Right? I did the math on that. $22 billion is 0.73% of their GDP.
0.7%.
0.73. They're not even at 1 point. Yeah, 0.73%.
Yeah, I hear about shit like that all the time. Like, I remember hearing that 23 million Americans or something, or some shit like that. That's like 7% of Americans or something. Yeah. So, like, when you hear certain people say they went platinum or some shit. They sold 1 million records or 2 million records. I mean, that's huge. Don't get me wrong. Like, if we had 1 million fucking views on one of our YouTube videos, I'd flip my entire shit. Don't get me wrong, but it's like that's such a small percentage. I remember the days, I'm sure you do too, where a motherfucker getting 1 million views on YouTube. I mean, it's a big deal now, like I said, but it was an especially big deal back then.
Oh, when it first came out, yeah, and it was unheard of. Like you had maybe 5 videos that had that.
Oh, yeah. That's when you were practically a celebrity at that point, you know?
People still talk about Chocolate Rain, you know what I mean?
Man, I don't want to bring him up. No, I'm not the chocolate rain dude, but I'm gonna say it was a gay guy, you know, and he had a popular. I'm gonna and he says a word that starts with a W a lot in the hook. I'll say that. Yeah, I know you know what I'm talking about. Yeah,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That was long ago, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't heard of it, kids, look up Chocolate Rain. It was a banger, though. I will say that.
yeah. And as far as the gay guy who says the W word that starts with a W, of course, and ends with a T, yeah, don't look that up. Just let that die.
Oh, you're talking about Samson. Yes, sir. Mr. What in the butt.
That was his name. Oh, I hate that. Because he shares the same name as I want to talk to Sam's. Oh, I hate the fact that they share the same name.
Devin's brothers went on tour with them for a while, with him.
You said whose brother?
Devin's brother, remember how they had that band? Was it Femme Fatale or whatever? And
Yeah.
yeah, his brother went on tour with them, with Samson, yeah.
Oh, damn. Tell me why. Oh, damn. The fact that it makes so much sense, like, if there's any motherfucker out of our little crew back then who I would expect to have some ties to that dude, it's Devin. That's something that makes sense.
And now hopefully the Haitian Revolution makes sense to some of the people listening, because I'm going to go ahead and put on my glasses and say the Haitian Revolution stands as a singular, profound event in modern history, validating the possibility of self-liberation and black sovereignty against insurmountable colonial odds. The study we did and the research we've done confirms several key conclusions regarding its prosecution, and legacy. First, the revolution's outbreak was a consequence of the colonial system's inherent severe structural instability, driven by extreme demographic disparity, 80% of the population being enslaved, and a short-sighted focus on brutal wealth extraction. This environment ensured that mass revolt was an inevitable consequence of the system itself. The success of the August 7th, critically enabled by the simultaneously fractures of the white and Afrikanist people, resulting from French attempts at limited reform following the ideals of the French Revolution. Second, the victory was achieved through a strategic combination of military brilliance, unifying cultural mechanisms, voodoo and maroon organizing, and catastrophic environmental factors. Toussaint Louverture expertly leveraged international rivalries, Spain and Britain, to legitimize abolition, while the yellow fever epidemic proved the decisive variable, destroying European forces and forcing Napoleon to abandon his Western imperial project, a failure that inadvertently facilitated the expansion of the U.S. via the Louisiana Purchase. Third, the establishment of the independent black state of Haiti in 1804 immediately posed a radical ideological challenge to the Atlantic world, leading to intense geopolitical isolation, particularly from the U.S., which refused to recognize Haiti until 1862. Most damagingly, the 1825 French indemnity debt represented a calculated act of financial neo-colonialism. This ransom imposed under military threat guaranteed a perpetual flow of Haitian wealth to French financial institutions for 122 years, severely crippling the nation's ability to achieve long-term economic development and perpetuating chronic internal instability over resource and labor management. The legacy of this enforced financial subjugation remains a central factor in Haiti's modern geopolitical and economic difficulties. And with that, I'll say we hit this one out of the park, people. I hope you learned a lot on the Haitian Revolution. I hope it really opened your eyes to how fucked the world can be, but how amazing the human spirit is as well. And This has been the Case So You Didn't Know show. Mr. Telberto Simpson, closing thoughts, things you'd like to plug, anything at all? Let me hear it, sir.
Definitely. I think we opened some eyes and we opened our own. And what more could we ask for than that? You know, TOLBERT Simpson, the Instagram handle. And overall, all bullshit aside, nice little random shout out. Major props to the fellow John Cena. You know, that's a major part of a lot of people's childhood that is gone. I like the fact that it seems like the whole world basically kind of stood hand in hand and watched John Cena kind of do his farewell tour, especially towards the end. I mean, that's all people were tweeting about and shit. I think that was a nice little. We talk about monoculture and how there's kind of a loss in monoculture a lot when we talk heavy on our topics and shit. If you don't know what a monoculture is, look that up. But I think that was a nice little monoculture moment for a time where they seem few and far between.
Hands down, hands down. And it was a beautiful final fight.
Oh yeah, and it's funny you see both of them smiling kind of in the match. They kind of break character when they have the emotional moments like that, you know. But it was cool though. Just overall, keep supporting us and stuff. But besides that, leave the cheese, and we'll always catch you in the next one.